Okay, so this is part 2 of my video exam, and in this video I'm going to be discussing prompt number 2, which discusses the theory of utilitarianism. So let's begin. So this theory is based on consequences that states that our actions are considered good or right based on the greatest possible balance they have between happiness and unhappiness. So in this theory, each person's happiness or worth is counted as 1, and through the hedonic calculator, we can view pleasure and happiness in quantifiable terms, where consequences for our actions are determined based on the amount of happiness or unhappiness that they produce. So actions that produce more happiness are going to be deemed as moral, whereas actions that are going to be producing more unhappiness are considered as immoral. However, as with all things, this is not a perfect theory, and there are some objections to it. So the first big objection is that it doesn't take into account personal relationships. So in class, we learned about the trolley or train example, but as a refresher, essentially you are choosing who dies, a larger group of people or a singular person. In order to stop a train, someone has to die. Who do you choose? According to utilitarianism theory, the right or moral thing to do here would be to save the larger amount of people at the expense of the singular person. However, the issue with this is that it doesn't take into account personal feelings and personal relationships, so it might be the correct thing to save the larger group of people by ultimately killing the singular person, but if that singular person happens to be a family member, like let's say your mother, it would be really difficult and upsetting for you to knowingly kill your mother in order to save a group of strangers. But according to this theory, the right thing to do would be kill your mom in order to save the larger group of people. However, the issue is that the right thing to do isn't necessarily the right thing for you. So the second issue is the lack of justice. And justice theory makes the case that everyone should be treated fairly, where equals are treated equally and unequals are treated unequally. But since this theory doesn't consider anything other than happiness, justice isn't really taken into account. So in the bridge train example that we learned about in class, we know that you are choosing to throw a man who is ultimately going to die off of a bridge in order to save a train with some people on it from crashing and those people getting hurt or dying. However, the issue with this is that until you threw him off the bridge, that man was considered an equal. I mean, you were both on the same playing fields, and he would not have been involved in the situation had you not thrown him off the bridge. So the question is, what makes it okay to sentence one person to death at the expense of others when you could have easily chosen a different way to stop the train? Let's say, why didn't you sacrifice yourself? I mean, if you're both considered equal, then you could have done it too. Now, there are some responses to these issues. The first one is that we should consider all the consequences and make sure that we are correct about what will happen, because, we're not always right about these things. And then the second thing is that our intuitions might be wrong. So using the train example again, you might think that the right thing to do is to save your mother because you have a personal relationship and it'd be a lot harder to kill your mom as opposed to the strangers, as we mentioned. But in reality, you very well might not be able to see that the right thing to do would be to save the group of strangers, because it feels harder to save them over saving your mother. But the response to this theory basically states that our intuitions might be wrong, so if that's the case, we need to step back and do what's best for the greatest amount of people.